This 65-metre-high mountain of rubbish in India symbolises a rapidly expanding global problem. What should countries do with their garbage, and how can they reduce the amount they produce every year? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Nastasia Tay. It's become a problem of global proportions. According to the World Bank, around 2 billion tonnes of waste is produced every year, and world leaders are struggling to figure out what to do with it all. Should it be buried, recycled or shipped off to another country? We begin our look at the options in East Delhi, India, where they're fighting to contain a 65-metre-high mountain of rubbish that gets larger every year. Elizabeth Puranam reports.
A mountain of waste. This is where 2,000 tonnes of East Delhi's rubbish is dumped every day. People living around the site say it's affecting their lives.
As you can see, the smell here is unbearable. If the wind blows towards us, then it's difficult to eat food at home. It is such a mess here.
The rubbish dump doesn't just smell bad, it's also dangerous. Methane gas from the waste sparks fires, releasing toxic fumes. Ghazipur began as a landfill in 1984 but reached its capacity nearly 20 years ago.
Like an engineered landfill, it means that you have a big hole which is dug out and then it is lined with non-permeable layers so that your toxic leachate of chemicals which comes out from garbage does not leak into the soil and cause water pollution. But in Ghazipur, there's no such thing.
Trucks continue to dump rubbish here despite Delhi's governor banning them after a part of the hill collapsed 2 years ago, killing 2 people.
This is a cruel joke. This is contempt of court. The people responsible continue to dump garbage in this site. They haven't stopped for a day after the court order.
We asked the East Delhi Municipal Corporation why this is happening.
But because of the no alternative land was available with us, so we continued to dispose of our garbage at this landfill site.
It's estimated Delhi produces 14,500 tonnes of waste every day. The problem of waste isn't confined to the city's rubbish dumps, though. Around 3,000 tonnes, or a fifth of the rubbish produced daily, isn't collected, leaving it lying on the streets and other open spaces. Jay Prakash Chaudhary manages this recycling centre and says waste isn't just the government's responsibility.
We feel that waste segregation should begin at home. If people start segregating waste, then waste can be recycled properly. And the direct consequence will be that garbage mountains like the one at Ghazipur won't be necessary at all.
The East Delhi Municipal Corporation has started testing a recycling program in 3 areas this year. They hope to roll it out to the rest of the region within 1 year. They also say they'll start clearing Ghazipur in September, and some of its waste will be used to build a national highway. Elizabeth Puranam, Al Jazeera, East Delhi.
Well, let's bring in our guests now. In New Delhi, we have Arunabha Ghosh. He is the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. In Oxford, we have Sharon George. She's a lecturer at Keele University who specialises in green technology. And in Hong Kong, via Skype, we have Chi Ye. He is the director of the Institute of Public Policy at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Welcome to you all. Let me start with you, Arunabha. What we've just seen there in Liz's report, how widespread is the lack of waste processing in India? And what are the biggest challenges that the government faces in trying to address it?
India is one of the fastest urbanizing countries in the world. Just its urban population would be the world's 3rd largest country by population. So against this kind of massive push of people to the cities, there is certainly a major challenge of managing solid waste. And most of the waste in our cities doesn't get processed. So what that does is it has an impact on the local environment in terms of the landfill and the methane emissions, etc. It also has an impact in terms of the lost economic opportunity that we could get if we decided to use waste as a resource rather than only something to throw away.
Well, Arunabha, what we're seeing in India is a global problem. So let's also take a look at some of the global figures. Now, the World Bank says around 270 million tons of waste is recycled every year. And recycling is now estimated to be a $200 billion industry. Now, it was China that once led the global recycling trade, but it said it banned waste imports just under 2 years ago because of the threat to the environment. Since then, other countries such as Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia and Turkey had been taking in that rubbish. But they're now concerned they could become dumping grounds for rich countries. Thailand is imposing a ban by 2021, and the Malaysians are also cracking down on garbage imports. So with all that said, Professor Chi in Hong Kong, let me ask you about that Chinese ban, because they said it was about environmental reasons. How much of this is about the environment versus politics and economics?
I don't know why people think it has to do with politics at all. If it is a green politics. It's a great politics to play. I think the reason that China decided to ban this garbage import from other countries is totally due to these environmental concerns. Every year, that by processing this waste, much of that are toxic and waste, and a lot of people get sick, and many of them are children. And also by processing these waste, and it takes a lot of energy and releases a great amount of greenhouse gases that also get accounted as a contribution of China to the global climate change. This is considering all these problems, environmental problems, the climate change problems, public health problems. I think the Chinese government finally decided to do the right thing, which is to ban this garbage import from other countries.
Well, we're hearing about the toxicity of all of this. So, Sharon, let me ask you, a lot of the waste that's being shipped is ostensibly to be recycled, right? So, but not all waste can be recycled. Like low-grade plastics, for instance, can't be recycled. What's the proportion of waste that can't be recycled or disposed of safely?
Well, I think we're just discovering now that what we thought was being recycled and what we thought was recycled is a lot less than we thought, because what technically is a different question between the proportion that is able to be recycled and that is actually able to be recycled, because it's not just about whether it can technically be recycled, it's whether it is and whether those facilities are in place. So a lot of our packaging in the West is technically recyclable, but actually it's very expensive to do that. And the part of the problem is that we've been exporting poor quality waste, exacerbating these problems that we've just been talking about, and basically exporting our problem without dealing with it ourselves.
And so, Sharon, you were telling me about the poor waste that's being exported, and because of that, there is this developing political dynamic as well. And I want to play you a couple of sound bites from world leaders who've been pushing back against that waste trade.
We will declare war. We will load the containers on a ship and tell Canada that your garbage is on the way. Prepare a grand reception. Eat it if you want to.
You're producing too much waste, and you have problem trying to get rid of the waste. Landfills and all that doesn't serve any purpose anymore. You cannot burn the waste because of the smoke and all the other pollutants. So it is grossly unfair for rich countries to send their waste to poor countries simply because the poor countries have no choice. Maybe it contributes a little to their economy.
So there's some pretty strong rhetoric that we're hearing there, both from President Duterte of the Philippines and Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad from Malaysia. Arunabha, I want to ask you, even though we're hearing this strong rhetoric, there is an economic incentive, as Mahathir Mohamad there just acknowledged, for this waste trade. So why are we seeing this pushback now?
I think the pushback is happening for two reasons. One is that, as one of the other panelists was also saying, what is potentially recyclable does not always get recycled. So the economic opportunity on paper might not always be converting in practice. The The second reason is that you have to still establish a massive supply chain of waste segregation, waste processing, recycling, then reusing in products, which can then again be exported out. Unless that is there, and you keep increasing the amount of waste that keeps coming in from other countries, there is going to be likely a pushback. On top of all of that, there is what I was saying earlier. There is the internal pressures of increasing urbanization, not just in a country like India, but all emerging economies, whether in Africa, whether in Asia, which have to deal with their own waste. So I think it is important to understand that if we just limit this to, it's not my problem, as long as I can just transfer it somewhere else, that will not solve this either at a global level or even at a national or a city level within our countries. We have to remove the ick factor from waste and begin the recycling, the segregation, the processing at home. That's where the supply chain has to begin.
Arunabha, I want to ask you a follow-up on that, because if waste is processed differently, it's not just an environmental or health issue, but there are people who earn their livelihoods, who feed themselves because of the money they make from picking through trash. And I believe in India, it's less than 1% of the population, 0.1%, but that's still more than 1 million people. So what happens to the people who are waste pickers and live off the waste? What happens to them and their livelihoods if waste is processed differently?
I think there have been actually a lot of initiatives, even within India, not pan-country, but in several cities, where the same so-called rag pickers who were actually going through the garbage dumps with their bare hands are actually being retrained into as kind of the workers who would work in proper recycling, segregation, sorting facilities. So as soon as you think of this as an either-or, either you let them continue as they are, leading these nasty, brutish and short lives, or you do waste segregation and recycling in a modern form, that either-or will not obviously create the right political and economic incentives at the community level. We've got to take the same communities, either give them alternative livelihood opportunities or retrain and reskill them. And that's what is happening in cities, in several cities across India. Of course, this has to be scaled up. This is what I meant earlier as well, that we need to remove that ick factor. We can't only treat this as someone else is going to treat my waste, which means that at a community level, we need to re-establish a social contract between the waste processors, the communities, the residents, and the state. Unless the social contract emerges, this will always feel like someone else is literally dumping their rubbish on us.
So with things potentially changing a little bit in India, let me ask you, Professor Chi, about what's happening in China. So China used to take something like 70% of the world's waste, and now it's dealing with its own waste. 67 million tons of domestic trash every year. What's it doing with its own rubbish now? Is anything actually changing there since this ban was imposed in 2018?
Yeah, let me just go back to the point you just raised about the economic case. I think there is economic case for the exporter of trash from the rich countries, because by exporting this low quality waste, you can actually save a lot of money to process this waste. On the poor countries side, the economic case can hardly be made. Of course, we can talk about the livelihood. And I mean, you just remind me, I live here in Hong Kong roughly 180 years ago, there was a war on opium. And you can say there is economic case for opium trade from the British companies to China. Then, but that economic case is just economics without morality. So I think that's pretty much the same case we're talking about here with the waste. And now China is taking this waste issue very seriously, and China has just released the national regulation and the national strategy to develop a so-called waste-free society, and started in 24 cities for pilot cities for this waste management. you probably can hear recently in cities like Shanghai and Beijing, sorting this garbage at household level has becoming a real big thing. So starting with dealing with the household level and the personal level, and the awareness of this waste management has been higher than ever. And in every city, and to develop the facilities to process the waste, and not just dumping and burying that landfill, but also in to process in the deeper levels. So I think as you just mentioned, China is also developing the whole industry by investing into waste management, waste processing. So that you can also hear, from time to time, and in places, and people are, protesting against the waste facilities here in China. I think from the government, the business, and the civil society levels, you can hear this really a big campaign on waste management is developing real quickly.
I want to bring Sharon in here because we're hearing about potentially things changing in China and India, these developing countries. But now that developed countries are struggling to find places to ship their rubbish to, what are they doing with it all, Sharon? And what are their options?
Well, at the moment, I think that, especially in the UK, we're kind of reeling from the realisation that the destination where we thought our waste was going is our waste just wasn't going where we thought, and we're finding, these shocking statistics about finding waste dumped and dumped into the environment, where people have been separating their waste in households and thinking they're doing the right thing. So that has a negative impact on people's behaviours. So in the UK, we're kind of trying to deal with tightening up the whole waste supply chain and making sure that there's due diligence in place to make sure that things are disposed of properly. But we're also looking at solutions on our own soil. So right now, waste to energy has become a big thing. So a lot of our waste is, more waste is going to incineration to produce electricity. So the calories from things like plastic are being used in incineration. So those things that are not so easily recycled and those lower value plastics are going straight to incineration to produce electricity for homes. And of course, there's technologies such as anaerobic digestion that produce biogas to reprocess waste food are also becoming popular and rising in importance in the UK.
Sharon, let me ask you there a little more about this idea of burning the waste, because there are health concerns about that in terms of the toxicity of the gases that come out, the emissions that we see from it. And I mean, some argue, Greenpeace for one, that it's really just kicking the can down the road, and that also basically building incinerators creates a market for single-use plastics, which is surely goes against the whole point of it.
Of course, this is the counter-argument. It is a very valid point. There's the argument that the plastics are replacing fossil fuels. But actually, if those plastics were reused, if those plastics were not single-use, that is quite right, that those incinerators are going to be looking for the calories, so they'll be seeking out waste with high calorific value and high plastics. So that is a problem, and an incinerator that's run properly should be low in emissions. And the argument is that the other scenario of having these plastics end up in the environment is down the road a health issue, as these things turn into more and more microplastics and potentially end up in the food chain. Of course, the answer to this is just don't produce so much waste in the first place. And we are aware in the UK that we're just producing too much waste.
Professor Chi in Hong Kong, I want to ask you, I see you've been listening to Sharon and are keen to jump in there. But what is China doing differently? You've talked about different waste management systems. What can the rest of the world learn from what China's doing?
Yeah, I was going to say Sharon was exactly right. China also faces this problem in incineration. And like I mentioned, in some places when incinerators are built, then you can, from time to time, you can hear about the protests. Not in my backyard, the NIMBY, the so-called NIMBY behavior here in China too. So therefore, the first thing to deal with the waste is to reduce the amount of waste generation every day at all levels. Then, from there, we go from reduce to reuse to recycle. And China actually, in just about 10 years ago, made a legislation about the circular economy, promoting for the circular economy. And now China is taking this very seriously. As I mentioned, the green financing, investment, lending, businesses in this area is really booming. So this becoming an emerging industry for the circular economy. I think that's very, very important development. You see a lot of industrial parks are now just redesigning and just putting together this waste and waste management by certain companies. I think that's one thing. Also, I mentioned this the so-called zero waste movement or zero waste strategy. And that is happening in about 2 dozen cities. And these cities are now doing the pilot. They're trying to do the experiment. They're trying to come up with some good practices and policy that can be scaled up at the national level. So this year, I think it just starting this whole campaign in dealing with the waste. Yeah.
Arunabha, I want to ask you as well, just coming off what Professor Chi was saying there, this whole idea about zero waste. We've seen various different developing countries, especially some in Africa, actually. I believe now 34 African countries have banned plastic bags. Tanzania was the last one in May. If the world's poorest region can do this, what's stopping the developed world from doing the same?
I think it's directly linked to our lifestyles. If we are not used to going to a shopping market and picking up a piece of fruit and putting it in a bag rather than wrapping it in plastic and then weighing it and then leaving, we will just not know that there is an alternative way of going about this. Which is why I fully agree with Professor Xu that it's not just reduce, reuse, and recycle. I would add one more level to this, which is reduce, reuse, recycle, life cycle. Unless we see from where something is coming and where it'll end up and how we take it back to the source and keep reusing it several times over, even the recycling operations will fall short otherwise of the amount of waste we'll keep generating. The resource footprint of the United States, for instance, is double that of India, even with 1/4 the number of people. So if you don't change your lifestyles, if you don't look at the life cycle of every product that you're using, you are going to be in this problem. So we have to, of course, create an economic case for a circular economy, and that China is demonstrating it. India's leading government agency that advises the government, the Niti Aayog, has also proposed to build up a major push for circular economy. But all of this comes after we change the lifestyles in the first place.
Indeed, and trying to find the political will to encourage people to do so. Huge challenges, and it's all about awareness, I guess, going ahead and watching the developing world actually take the lead for a change. Well, thank you to all our guests, Arunabha Ghosh, Sharon George, and Professor Chi Ye in Hong Kong. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nastasia Tay, and the whole team here, bye for now.